Stanley Martin Lieber. Stan Lee spent 70 years building one of the most extraordinary creative legacies in the history of American entertainment. Spider-Man, the X-Men, Iron Man, Thor, the Hulk, Black Panther, the Fantastic Four, characters that have generated hundreds of billions of dollars in films, merchandise, and licensing. He was a deity in popular culture. He made cameos in virtually every Marvel film, and in the final 18 months of his life, reeling from the death of his wife of nearly 70 years, his cognitive abilities declining, isolated from the people who had protected him for decades, a succession of advisors, managers, and associates used their proximity to take $21 million from the man behind the mask. This episode is about what happens when a predator is not a stranger and how to make sure it never happens to you.
Christopher Nassif spent his career building things. He was the youngest person in history to establish a top-tier talent agency, founding C&A and Associates at the age of 22, fresh out of USC. He launched careers: Luke Perry, Austin Butler, Chrissy Metz, James Vanderbeek, Ricky Martin, Sofia Vergara, and more. He built Diverse Talent Group into one of the top 8 agencies worldwide. And in the later years of his career as CEO of Diverse Media Group, Chris did something that very few agents ever accomplish. He transitioned from representing talent to building intellectual property, to creating things that lasted beyond the transaction. Part of that transition was a specific creative joint venture with Stan Lee's POW Entertainment. POW, Purveyors of Wonder, was the company Stan Lee founded after his complicated departure from Marvel. Chris's Diverse Media Group was tasked with identifying and securing high-profile celebrity and athlete talent for new superhero brands that POW was developing. He was inside the Stan Lee world, not from Wikipedia, not from the press coverage, from the inside of a creative and commercial operation. And what Chris saw from the inside was what he understood about the people orbiting Stan Lee in his final years. Was one of the most complete and devastating illustrations of everything this show was built to warn you about. The inside man is not a stranger. He is never a stranger. He is someone you invited in, someone you trusted, someone who understood where the money was, where the power was, where the vulnerability was, and waited for the moment when you could no longer protect yourself from what he already knew about you. Chris understood the difference between the people who came to build something and the people who came to take something. He had 40 years of watching both kinds of people operate at the highest level of the entertainment industry. He knew the difference the moment he walked into a room. Stan Lee did not have the protection in his final years, and $21 million walked out the door.
I'm Alexis Nassif.
And I am Natalie Francine. This is Wealth, War, and Real Estate. A State Interrupted. Episode 8, The Inside Man.
For women, by women, and men too.
True crime moment. Stanley Martin Lieber was born December 28, 1922 in New York City. He began working at Timely Comics, the predecessor to Marvel, in 1939 at the age of 17 as an assistant. He made coffee, he filled ink wells, he erased pencil marks on the finished pages. 2 years later, he was the interim editor of the company. He was 19. What followed over the next 4 decades was the most sustained creative output in the history of American comics. In the early 1960s, working with artists Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko, Stan Lee co-created virtually the entire Marvel universe in a period of just a few years. The Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, Thor, Iron Man, the Hulk, the X-Men, Doctor Strange, Black Panther, the Avengers, characters that defined American popular culture for the next 60 years and counting.
What made Stan Lee's creations different from everything that came before them was a single innovation. His superheroes had real problems. They were not gods descended from Olympus. They were people. Peter Parker was a broke teenager who could not afford rent. Tony Stark was an arms dealer with a drinking problem and a complicated moral history. The X-Men were outcasts, persecuted for being different. Bruce Banner was terrified of his own anger. That human dimension, the idea that a superhero could be powerful and struggling simultaneously, changed the entire genre. It changed film. It changed television. It changed how we tell stories about courage and failure and what it means to do the right thing in a world that makes it very difficult.
The commercial scale of what Stan Lee's creation became is almost impossible to fully articulate. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is the highest grossing film franchise in history. Avengers Endgame grossed $2.8 billion worldwide. Spider-Man films have grossed billions more. The merchandise, the licensing, the theme parks, the television shows, the revenue generated by the characters Stan Lee co-created has been estimated in the hundreds of billions of dollars.
Amazing.
Stan Lee's personal financial arrangement with Marvel and later with Disney after the 2009 acquisition generated approximately $1 million annually for his Marvel ties alone. His estate at the time of his death was estimated to be worth between $50 and $70 million. He was appearing in cameos in virtually every Marvel film. He was one of the most recognized faces in America popular culture.
Stan Lee's relationship with Marvel was not always comfortable. In the 1990s, during a period of financial turbulence at Marvel, he filed a lawsuit claiming Marvel had failed to pay him 10% of the profits from films and television shows based on his characters, as his contract required. The lawsuit was settled. The relationship was complicated. In 2001, Stan Lee co-founded POW Entertainment, Purveyors of Wonder, a production company focused on catering new superhero properties, leveraging Stan Lee's name and creative reputation to build characters and stories outside the Marvel universe. POW became the vehicle through which Stan Lee attempted to build something that was entirely his, not subject to the corporate ownership disputes that had complicated his Marvel relationship for decades.
Chris's diverse media group held a specific creative joint venture with POW Entertainment. They were working together to identify and secure high-profile celebrity and athlete talent for new superhero brands. That collaboration placed Chris in the orbit of Stan Lee's creative and commercial operation. The difference between the people genuinely trying to build something with Stan Lee and the people positioning themselves around Stan Lee's name, his image, his signature, and his declining ability to monitor what was being done in his name. The war. Stan Lee built one of the most valuable creative legacies in the history of American entertainment. He did it over 70 years of extraordinary productive work. He survived corporate battles, ownership disputes, financial crises, and complicated transition from print to film. And in the final 18 months of his life, after his wife died, after his cognitive abilities began to decline, after the people who had protected him for decades were pushed out, the predators moved in. They did not come from outside his life. They came from inside his life. True crime moment. July 2017, Joan Lee, born Joan Clayton Bucock, Stan Lee's wife of nearly 70 years, dies at the age of 93. She had met in 1947. She had been with him his entire creative career. She had urged him to create the Fantastic Four when he was considering leaving comics. She had managed his personal life with the same force, that personality that characterized everything she did. She was the wall between Stan Lee and the people who wanted access to his wealth and his name. When Joan died, that wall came down, and the people who had been waiting for that moment moved immediately. Stan Lee was 94 years old when Joan died. He was experiencing cognitive decline. He was grieving the loss of the person who had been the center of his world for 7 decades.
Long time.
He was a man of extraordinary creative intelligence who was becoming increasingly dependent on the people around him to manage the practical details of his life. That combination, wealth, celebrity, grief, cognitive decline, and dependence, is the single most dangerous combination in elder financial abuse. It is the profile that predators recognize and target with extraordinary precision. True crime moment.
Yeah.
Gerardo Jerry Olivares had positioned himself in Stan Lee's life as a trusted associate. After Joan's death, he moved quickly to consolidate his position. He convinced Stan Lee to sign a power of attorney granting Olivares authority over his financial affairs. With that power of attorney in hand, Olivares proceeded to dismantle the protective infrastructure that had surrounded Stan Lee for decades. He fired Stan Lee's banker of 26 years without authorization. He transferred approximately $4.6 million out of Stan Lee's bank accounts through a series of transactions. He convinced Stan Lee to sign over rights and to make loans to companies that were in various ways connected to Olivares' own financial interests. He bought an $850,000 condominium using Stan Lee's money. He transferred nearly $1.4 million out of accounts through wire transfers. He loaned $300,000 to merchandising company that was presented to Stan Lee as a nonprofit dedicated to racial peace.
Olivares also appointed his own attorney, Yuri Litvak, as Stan Lee's attorney for business dealings. He did not disclose to Stan Lee that Litvak simultaneously represented Olivares in personal matters. That undisclosed conflict of interest meant that the attorney who was supposed to be advising Stan Lee was actually connected to the person who was exploiting him. Stan Lee eventually filed a lawsuit against Olivares for elder abuse, fraud, and misappropriation of his name and likeness. The lawsuit was ultimately settled. The financial damage could not be fully undone, though.
True crime moment. Max Anderson had accompanied Stan Lee to comic book convention for nearly a decade. Over the course of those years, he had attended 111 conventions around the world. At those conventions, Anderson and a business partner operated a booth where fans paid up to $120 for a Stan Lee autograph on a collectible. The lawsuit filed by Stan Lee's daughter, JC, alleged that Anderson had stolen at least $11.1 million in autograph revenue and $10.2 million in appearances fees, a total of $21.3 million over the course of his time managing Stan Lee convention appearances. Anderson's position was that he was not paid monetary compensation and was instead paid in autographed collectibles, which he then sold. The lawsuit alleged that Stan Lee never saw profits from the autograph that his own signature generated.
Yeah.
Before Stan Lee died, Anderson allegedly convinced him to sign an agreement granting Anderson a worldwide licensing to use Stan Lee's name and likeness in perpetuity for $1. A worldwide license in perpetuity for $1. Stan Lee, at 95, cognitively compromised, surrounded by people who were managing his access to information and to the outside world, signed an agreement that would have given away one of the most valuable name and likeness rights in American entertainment for $1. The lawsuit settled in May 2025. True crime moment. K.A. Morgan presented himself to Stan Lee as a friend and protector following Joan Lee's death. He became increasingly involved in managing Stan Lee's daily life, accompanying him to events, managing his schedule, controlling who could speak with him and when. A Los Angeles judge granted a temporary restraining order against Morgan in 2018 after Stan Lee's former attorney filed a petition alleging elder financial abuse, undue influence, and the systematic isolation of Stan Lee from his longtime friends, associates, and family members. The petition alleged that Morgan had effectively placed Stan Lee in a controlled environment where his access to independent information and independent advisors was severely restricted. Morgan was arrested on multiple counts of elder abuse. Criminal charges were ultimately dropped after a mistrial. The jury deadlocked, 11-1 in favor of acquittal.
What is important to understand about K.A. Morgan and about the broader pattern of what happened to Stan Lee is a specific technique of isolation. Financial predators who target elderly individuals with significant wealth use isolation as their primary tool. Not theft, isolation first. Remove the people who would recognize what is happening. Remove the longtime banker. Remove the longtime attorney. Remove the friends and family members who have institutional knowledge of who this person is and what they have. Then, once the target is isolated, the financial extraction can proceed without any interference from anyone.
The war. 3 different people, 3 different approaches. One common target, an elderly man of extraordinary wealth and cultural significance whose cognitive abilities were declining, whose lifelong protector had just died, and whose protective infrastructure was systematically dismantled by the people who replaced her. The predators who targeted Stan Lee were not unsophisticated opportunists. They were strategic architects of exploitation. They identified the moment of maximum vulnerability, Joan's death, and they executed a coordinated campaign of isolation and extraction. The inside man is always someone you know, and the inside man always arrives at your moment of greatest loss. Every other case in this series has involved a planning failure that occurred before death, an unfunded trust, a couch will, a secret amendment, a deathbed signature. The Stan Lee case is different because the predation happened while Stan Lee was alive, while he could still be exploited, while the people around him could still use his signature, his name, his authority against his own interest. This is elder financial abuse, and it is the fastest growing category of financial crime in America. The FBI estimates that elder financial abuse costs American seniors more than $3 billion annually. The actual figure is almost certainly higher because most cases are never reported, and most victims never fully understand what was even taken from them.
The specific profile that makes someone vulnerable to elder financial abuse is well documented. Cognitive decline, even mild cognitive decline that does not rise to the level of dementia, significantly increases vulnerability, social isolation, which is why the isolation tactic is so central to every predator's approach. Recent loss, the death of a spouse, the end of a long professional relationship that creates grief and dependence simultaneously, and wealth, because the financial incentive for predation scales directly with the target's asset. Stan Lee had all 4 risk factors simultaneously after Joan died. The predators recognized that, and they acted immediately to grab everything they could.
Absolutely. The protection framework that would have changed Stan Lee's story, and that every high net worth person needs to build before they are vulnerable.
Protection 1, an independent co-trustee or trust protector, a professional fiduciary, a bank trust department, a certified professional fiduciary, and an independent trust company with no personal relationship to the beneficiaries and no financial stake in the outcome of any specific decision. Someone whose sole obligation is fiduciary, someone who cannot be fired by a person being protected, whose authority is established in the trust document itself. Stan Lee's wealth was subject to a power of attorney that Alvarez had to dismantle his financial infrastructure. A properly structured trust with an independent co-trustee could have required Alvarez to get the co-trustee's approval for any significant financial transaction. Firing the banker of 26 years would have required the co-trustee's consent. Transferring $4.6 million would have triggered review. The power of attorney cannot override a properly structured trust.
Protection 2, financial monitoring with independent oversight, a CPA or a financial advisor who receives regular statements from all accounts, not the same person who manages the accounts and who has a mandate to flag unusual activity, not to manage, to watch, to compare this month's statement to last month's statement and ask what changed. Why did this account move $1.4 million? Why was this banker terminated? Who authorized this transfer? This is not expensive. A quarterly review engagement with a CPA costs a fraction of what the absence of a review costs when a predator is operating. Stan Lee was generating $1 million annually from Marvel alone. A quarterly financial review would have cost a few $1,000s per year. The absence of it cost $21 million.
Protection 3, a trusted inner circle that knows each other. This is the most important protection against the isolation tactic. The predator's most powerful tool is keeping your protectors from communicating with each other. If your attorney knows your banker, who knows your financial advisor, who knows your closest family member, and if those people communicate regularly, the predator cannot operate in the gaps between them. Stan Lee's longtime attorney was fired. His banker of 26 years was fired. The people who could compare notes, who could say to each other, "Does this seem right to you?" were systematically removed. Build a team that communicates, and build into your documents the requirement that they continue to communicate even if someone tries to separate them. Very important.
Absolutely. Protection 4, a legacy protection document, a written statement signed and notarized, kept with your estate planning documents, that identifies the people you trust, the people you do not trust, the values that should guide decisions about your name and image and intellectual property, and the specific red flags that should trigger a review of who is managing your affairs. Not a legal document, a human document. One that says, if these people are no longer in my life, ask why. If these transactions have occurred, something is wrong.
Protection 5, a conservatorship or trust provision for cognitive decline. No one wants to think about this. No one wants to plan for the moment when they can no longer make decisions independently, but the Stan Lee case demonstrates exactly what happens when that moment arrives without a plan. A properly structured revocable trust can include provisions that trigger when specific conditions are met. When two independent physicians certify cognitive decline, the trustee structure changes. The protections engage automatically. The predator cannot wait for the right moment because the trust does not give them a right moment.
War. Stan Lee created superheroes because he understood something profound about human vulnerability. That great power and great need can exist simultaneously in the same person. Peter Parker was Spider-Man and also a broke kid who could not pay rent. Tony Stark was Iron Man and also a man fighting his own self-destruction. Stan Lee was the most beloved figure in popular culture and a 95-year-old widower who needed protection he did not have. Build the shield while you are strong.
Yeah.
Because the predators are not waiting for you to be weak. They are already in the room. Stan Lee made his final public cameo in Avengers Endgame, released in April 2019, 5 months after his death. The character he played was a briefly glimpsed face in a crowd, a moment of joy for 2 million fans who recognized him and felt the warmth of his presence one last time.
It's very sad.
He deserved to leave the world knowing that what he built was protected, that the people he trusted had earned that trust, that the 21 million that was taken from him in his final years had instead gone to the causes and the people he had spent a lifetime working to provide for. Chris Nassif held a creative joint venture with Stan Lee's POW Entertainment. He saw the difference between the people who came to build and the people who came to take. And what Chris understood, what he always understood, was that the judicial war and the predatory war are not separate events. They are the same war, the war over wealth. And it comes for everyone who is not prepared. This show exists because Chris knew the difference, because he spent 40 years watching what happens when the protection is not in place. And because the woman who listens to this show deserves the same clarity he had about who to trust, what to build, and how to make sure that what they create outlasts the people who would take it.
Next week, New York, Tony Bennett earned $100 million in live performances in his final 15 years. His daughters were told his estate was worth less than $7 million. The man managing the estate was also the man managing the money, and the accounting has never fully been explained. The gap has been there, big gap.
Episode 9, the sibling standoff.
The 20-year question this week: if your cognitive abilities decline tomorrow, who would manage your financial affairs? And does that person have a mandatory reporting obligation to someone independent, someone who checks their work, someone who sees the statements, someone who cannot be fired by the person making the decisions? If the answer is no, what are you building today to change that?
I am Natalie Francine. This is Estate Interrupted.
I'm Alexis Nassif. This is Wealth, War, and Real Estate. For women, by women.
Thank you. See you next time.